Hi and welcome to the helicopter tutorial for Flyout. I'm just gonna quickly tell you the main things about making helicopters and the main caveats. And I'm going to assume that all of you know how to make the fuselage and you've watched the other tutorials on the Flyout server. So your basics are just having your main rotor, tail rotor, and an engine. And both the tail rotor and the main rotor should be connected via a gearbox. Now the gearing depends on what kind of engine you have. If you have a turbine, you should start at around 45. You might need to actually increase your final drive as well, because the turbines can vary from 18,000 up to 30,000 revolutions per minute. And with helicopters, you want your rotor RPM on the main rotor to be between 500 and 600 RPM, depending on what your tip Mach is going to be. You do not want your tip to exceed Mach 1 at any point. So keep that in mind and check in flight what your tip Mach is going to be. This one has fairly short rotor blades, so it's going to have above 600 RPM just because of the size. But if you're making something like a Chinook, you're probably going to aim closer to 450, 500. So 500 to 600 is the average for a normal sized helicopter. Now the tail rotor is going to need a lot more speed just because it's smaller and the diameter is quite small. You might need to increase your diameter or your RPM if you're having trouble. Usually the tail rotor needs to turn a lot faster than the main rotor, and again you're looking at tip Mach. So if your tip Mach is around 0.5, 0.6, that's going to be just okay. You can increase the yaw range and the response speed, so you will get a more responsive yawing. I wouldn't recommend ever going above 30 range, just because it's going to become way too strong and you're gonna lose fine control over your helicopter, especially if you're trying to fly using the keyboard and mouse. Now the gearbox here is way smaller on the ratio. On the main rotor I have 45 and 2, so it's getting over twice the reduction than this one. And you're going to see it. I'm going to show it to you in flight very soon, so you will notice how much of a difference there is. Otherwise, the biggest problems you might end up with helicopters is having your weights in incorrect position. If you look at your rotor hub, which is this part, if your weight when empty on fuel is below this portion, it's going to be fine. If it's on the side or in front or back, it's going to be causing issues. This is basically the same as having your center of lift somewhere around the center of mass on an airplane, except you don't care about center of lifts on a helicopter because it's basically going to be below the rotor hub, unless you're making something like a Chinook, which is a tandem rotor. Then you're going to have some problems. For helicopter controls, you have the collective, which is basically your throttle. You want your engine to pretty much always be on the same power, unless you're cruising for a long period of time. You can drop your throttle a little bit, but usually you're just gonna leave it at 100. So change the collective. Having negative range on the collective is not useful at all, and I would never recommend going below 0 on the collective. So you can change this to 0 if you want. I usually leave it here. Your cyclic pitch, you need to check out if this is going to be positive or negative by doing a test flights. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. I don't exactly know why, but the range by default is 2.5. That's a bit too much for almost any kind of helicopter, so I recommend starting with 2. Same with the roll, it goes from -5 to 2.5. Go with 2, don't go higher. That's all you need for a basic style helicopter. Then you have your tail rotor. It's only gonna have yaw on it. You could actually increase the default value by just a bit, but if you have the gearbox set up correctly, this is going to cause some thrust, and it should not require you to use any kind of yaw at normal takeoff speed. Okay, now a helicopter turbine is very different from a jet aircraft turbine. You're going to want to have no fan at all, very low LPC pressure, very low HPC pressure. You can increase the HPC pressure higher. I would never go above overall pressure ratios 10, and even that is just for very heavy aircraft and bigger engines. This one is quite small. It's only a 20 centimeter diameter engine, and you really don't need more. Even a bigger aircraft, bigger helicopter could easily fly with this engine. Temperature as low as possible. Idle throttle is, well, whatever you need it to be, just have to try. Has to be a power turbine, and make it so that it's right on the left edge. You want it at 0.05, as much power to the shaft as possible. Hydraulic pump, alternator, doesn't really matter. You can leave them right there. No nozzle. Otherwise, it's the same as a jet engine, except you want the tip muck to be extremely low and the pressure ratio is really low. Tip muck of 0.35 is, I usually start with that. Sometimes I go up to 0.4, sometimes 0.3, but 0.35 is a good place to start. And you just want these two values to be pretty close to each other. Just don't go too low. If you go too low, you're gonna need a lot of idle throttle, and it's gonna take a long time to spool up. It's going to work even with, let's say, 1.0 and 1.5, but having them a little bit. Okay, and to fly your helicopter, you're going to want to increase your throttle to pretty much 100%. And if you right click on the rotor, you can see what the rotor RPM is going to be. Same with the tail rotor. There's a fairly high RPM on the tail rotor, but you do need that just to make the thrust. Make sure you try all the turning, everything, so that it works. And when you start to fly, use just a tiny bit of collective, just to get yourself up, so you can see how much you have to yaw. Keep yourself straight, and you can start to lift off. You'll notice that once you get off the ground, you will stop gaining distance after a short while. That's because of the ground effect. And you want to gain speed as fast as you can, because the more speed you have, the more air your rotor blades are going to get, and the less collective you're going to need. You can just increase the collective and aim just point your nose a little bit towards the ground. Once you start to gain enough speed, you can start to level out and decrease your collective. In order to turn, you just fly it like a airplane would. Just turn and pull on the stick. You can use a little bit of yaw if you want. If you need to make a sharp turn, you can use more yaw. But this is going to slow you down. It's going to drop your rotor RPM because you're going to be taking a lot of air, which you can actually see because the rotor blades are going to turn a lot upwards. Now, in order to land, you want to slowly get your speed low down and drop your collective. Point your nose up, drop your collective. Don't try to do this too fast, just slow down quietly, slowly. And remember, the less speed you have, the more collective you're going to need to stay up. So slowly increase the collective, not so as to not come too quickly towards the ground and crash. You're going to have to change how much yaw you are using as you're coming down.